I'm just setting up. I'll be camera on in a minute, okay?
Hello.
Hi, Ebtisam. Thank you for stepping in and going first. Hi,
No,
everyone.
we are live.
Excellent.
So, hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome to the webinar of the Middle East Council on Global Affairs on the impact of the Gaza war on the region reset. The regional politics on October 6, October 7, and October 8 represented completely different pictures. On October 6, the talk of the towns, the talk on the Middle East very much focused on the question of the reset in the Middle East, the question of normalization, the question of the potential regional cooperation, whether this reset, normalization, or thaw period in the region will pave the way for regional, some form of the regional order. And then came the October 7th that basically shook the foundation of the regional security. And then came the October 8, 9, 10, and basically that has very much tested, very much affected all the trends that existed before October 7th. Some of these trends still hold, some of these trends has been undermined. Before the October 7th, one major topic was the Saudi-Israeli normalization. It is not off the table, but it has been very much delayed by this process. So today we will be discussing all these trends that has been unleashed by the Gaza invasion and its impact on the regional reset, regional normalization, intra-regional affairs, the place of the external actors in regional politics. To do this, we have a great line of speakers with us. We have Ebtisam Ketbi of the Emirates Policy Center. We have Daniel Levy of the US project in the Middle East. We have Trita Parsi of the Quincy Institute. We have Vali Master of the Johns Hopkins University in Washington. Before we start, some housekeeping notes. There is Arabic language translation, so please, on the interpretation part, choose the Arabic channel if you want to listen to the conversation in Arabic. And also, please, if you have any question, post it on the chat box, and I will pose it to the speakers in the Q&A part. We already received quite many questions through the email, so we already have 7-8 questions with us. But if you have any further question, please do send it to us. And also, yes, today we will be discussing the impact of the Gaza invasion on the region reset. And there is an extremely concerning development since yesterday, the attacks on Rafah city that might potentially cause a major humanitarian catastrophe, given the high level of the civilians that is living there. So without further ado, let me start with Ebtisam. So Ebtisam, and start with the basic or the most generic question of the conversation. Basically, how the Gaza war affected the regional reset, and what do you expect for this reset going forward?
Thank you, Ghalib, and thanks for Middle East Council for inviting me to this important webinar and discussion. Look, since the Gaza war started, I was describing it as a game changer. A game changer. It came in the time where all the region tending towards de-escalation, and that was obvious. All the players, from Iran to Turkey to the Gulfs as well, and the Israeli. We were in more normalization. Iran with the Gulf, Israel with some of the Gulf countries and some of the Arabic countries. So that, I would say, it stopped that normalization process, or paused, in fact, that normalization process. Also, I would say it has brought the US back to the Middle East. If you remember, all that was in the beginning of a Biden administration, that he stated that Middle East is not any more important for US, and they are leaving Middle East. So this war also brought US back. Also, it highlighted the role of non-state actors, or if you want to say the axis of resistance, or Iranian proxies, mostly the Houthi in disrupting the navigation in the Red Sea, or Hezbollah. And it has been, from the Iranian perspective, it was useful in investing in these proxies. The other thing that also the ongoing war prompts the re-evaluation of the approach of regional actors in the Middle East and North Africa. They are increasingly pursuing more independent foreign policies and embracing broader self-regulation amid great powers competition and what appears to be a trend towards multipolarity in the international system. Also, the war prompts reconsidering the argument that geoeconomics surpass geopolitics in the emerging Middle East. This trend began to take shape in the years leading to October 7, 2023. Also, this war has raised doubt about the stability of Iran-Gulf reconciliation due to the Iranian interactions through the so-called axis of resistance in the Middle East. Also, we are talking about the corridors, the connectivity, mainly the IMEC. That project or even the Abrahamic Accord disrupted by that escalation in Gaza and pushed the parties to find another way, another corridors to pass by. Also, it raised the key questions such as the hardliner coalition in Israeli shifted from growing domestic political and electoral formula into fundamental dilemma with the normalization and the future of US-sponsored regional integration projects with Israel. I would say also it shows that it brings back the Palestinian cause in the middle of the discussion that any stability projects in the region cannot be going on without solving this Palestinian cause. So if we say the Middle East prosperity, stability is connected or are connected to solving the Palestinian issue, the solution is linked to adequacy dealing with Iran's issue and its armed proxies in the region. All this, Gaza war brought it on the discussion, and now non-state actors bring them. Before, we thought that we defeated all those non-state actors. It seems no. They are key players now in the region. So how you will deal with them? The normalization between Saudi and Israeli also disrupted. And how this will affect the normalization between Iran and Saudi. The war turned the losers from the normalization or reconciliation to spoilers. So also it highlights the question to how extent the spoilers can disrupt the de-escalation in the region or defreezing the conflict in the region?
I think some of the points that you raised is extremely important. I think two particularly noteworthy, actually three. One of them, the word disruption was quite a central word that you use in describing how this process has disrupted the Abraham Accord, undermined the IMEC, tested the Iran Gulf normalization, but also it was very important how you said the loser of the previous normalization process has turned into the spoiler of this process. So two very brief questions to you. First, how IMEC and Abraham Accord has been disrupted by this? So what do you expect on these two fronts? Secondly, can you please expand on your emphasis on the loser of this previous reset turning into its spoilers?
Well, let me start with the second question first. Look, before the Gaza war, the normalization process, or the talking about normalization process between Saudi and the Iranian was taking place. So, and this is, of course, Iran look at it as they are losers. And they are also excluded from the IMEC. So also they are becoming losers. Plus, the Saudi, they did not talk to Hamas, but they went to PA. So Hamas also thought they are losers from that normalization, which has been going on. So both, and if we go to the border picture, the IMEC, the Chinese look at it that it is created to take or parallel, and they are looking at it as an American project, tend to take the place of Belt and Road. So also they were thinking they are losers. Plus, of course, the Russian, because of they have been sanctioned, isolated, also they are losers. So all the losers can or turn to be spoilers, has benefited from what's happening. Of course, now if you are talking about Russian, nobody's talking about Ukraine. The headline is about Gaza, right? The normalization process being disrupted between Saudi and the Israeli. And for Chinese, also the IMEC had stopped. Now, how to deal? Maybe there is a food corridor between UAE and India, and through Bahrain, Saudi to Israel. This is now how is this moving, but it is until UAE found another corridor, which is going, they call it development corridor between through Iraq and Turkey, okay, going to the Mediterranean. This is another way how to, but also the Chinese find that showing that Belt and Road is more useful than the others. There's nothing disrupt that. It's going in a stable area.
The nexus of connectivity and order in the region is becoming more and more important when you talk about IMEC, the Belt and Road initiatives, the new development road projects. So it is becoming quite an central item that shows how the regional realignment are manifesting themselves. Daniel, the Palestinian question on October 6th was treated as a side issue, not as the core question of the Middle Eastern politics, not the central question. But on October 8th, now we are talking the whole regional realignment, the international powers in the region, the question of the regional security, all of them through the Palestinian issue lenses. So how the place of the Palestinian issue in the regional politics has evolved since October 7th?
Thank you very much. And I apologize if I'm a bit coughing. I'm not I'm not feeling 100%, but I'm pleased to be with the Middle East Council and with people who I respect greatly who are on this virtual panel. Yes, what a terrible cost to have to pay to demonstrate the unsustainability of Israeli-Palestinian realities prior to October 7th. The attempt to say, oh, Palestine, that's such a 20th century old school question. Let's just move on. We can, surely we can just do a bit of, put a new coat of paint on the apartheid and it will all be okay. That I think has come home and blown up in everyone's faces, and the fragility of that status quo ante. And for years and years, those who had made the argument that this is not sustainable. You cannot keep people in these conditions. You cannot impose an apartheid reality and expect it to go smoothly and to be stable. And to be perfectly fair, the onus was on those who made the argument, no, it's going to blow up. This is not sustainable. Those who were claiming that this has been nicely managed had years of relative sustainability on their side. And those of us who were in the you're getting this wrong camp would never have wished what happened on October 7th and what has happened every day since to happen. And we warned against it. When you asked that question, Gali, I was thinking one could make a list, one could do a ledger of just how little things have evolved. One could make a ledger which would really give the Israeli leadership some satisfaction that 7 months into this absolute hellscape, one could list it. No Arab state has a peace treaty with Israel, has nullified that. No state that has established relations with Israel has downgraded or ended those relations. In many ways, the regional governmental responses have played according to what went on previously, where one has seen massive protests, where one has seen an appeal to the ICJ on violations of the Genocide Convention. Those massive protests have largely happened elsewhere. The ICJ was initiated by South Africa. The trade relations have been cut by Turkey, not by any Arab state. The cutting of diplomatic relations is Colombia and a number of other countries, not Arab states. So you could paint a picture there that includes the desire on the Arab state side. I'm talking in general here, without going into granularities on specific states, but as a general picture. One could even look at the way of engaging with Palestinian politics. And you still have this effort to pretend that you can have a technocratic Palestinian Authority government that is blessed by America and quietly blessed by Israel, and that this is how we can continue to manage Palestinian politics. So one could make a case that little has changed. I think the other side of that ledger is more powerful, and I think that's where the sources of satisfaction with Israel end. But I don't want to entirely dismiss that the management structure in the region that Israel and the United States have put in place does not have a robustness, because I think to some degree it has. But nonetheless, let me make the counter argument, the other side of that equation, how things have evolved or been disrupted. And I think that begins with a very simple fact, that what is motivating people around the world to adopt the Palestinian cause as their own, even those who are not Palestinian, what is leading to this mass mobilization, what is what is causing people to see the issue of Palestine as such an example of injustice everywhere, injustice in their own life, applies in the region as well, of course. People are exposed to many of the same images, many of the same songs, many of the same viral videos. People have been repoliticized around this question. And I want to suggest that that has happened in a way where, especially in parts of the region, the Palestine issue was tainted by the complicity and the corruption of its leaders. And I think because in the last few months, Palestine as a cause has been taken out of the hands of those deeply unattractive leadership characters, let me put it like that, and is in the hands of tremendously articulate, evocative, credible people who have taken up this cause, people being filmed in Gaza, in exile, elsewhere. Those images have broken through, and they've broken through in the region as well. So it's not to say that suddenly Palestine became an iconic cause, but I think a lot of the problematic things that were associated with the Palestinians have been, not swept away forever, but have been shrunken to their real proportions. Let's be clear. There have been major protests in some places. Jordan strikes me as one very important example, but that's not necessarily the key measure here. And I think a reality of identification with, recognition of the Palestinian cause, it has touched a whole new generation, a generation that people thought were moving on and were only interested in entertainment. And now here, part of that, not entertainment, but part of that consumption of social media has Palestine at its center. And I think when they see people mobilized elsewhere in the world, they say, hell yeah, this is also an issue that affects me. So that's one thing. A second thing I'd say is Israel's image has changed. I think this has, again, just as Israel's image has been impacted globally, I think it has been impacted in the region in a couple of important ways, at least. First of all, the image of military invincibility. I mean, a lot of the attractiveness of the deepening of this partnership with Israel was, wow, these guys are top. They're the best at intel. They're the best at running interference with the other side. They've got the hard-ass military that no one else has. Look at all the fantastic toys and hardware and software and all. Where was it? What a staggering failure on October the 7th and every day since. People are looking at this and saying, just run by me the other options again of who I can cooperate with on certain things, because this isn't working out so well for them. How it's gone militarily on the ground. When you destroy everything, you devastate Gaza in the way you have, that doesn't really show that your infantry are confident of how they could conduct themselves in urban warfare at close quarters. So it's raised some real questions about the efficacy, the utility of the kind of regional military alliances that have been on the table. And I'd throw one other thing into the mix. Of course, these guys are a bit extreme, aren't they? Oh, bloody hell. Did you see the latest video? No, not that one, the latest one, today's one, not yes. The extremism of actual existing Zionism in the state of Israel, I think has come as a real shock to a lot of people. I think they thought that this was maybe confined to the margins. They thought, yeah, but we know these people, they play it a bit, but these are hard-headed, realist, moderate types. This was the image that we were being given of Israel. And I think people have had to take a long, hard look at what it means to be allied with that extremism. A couple of other thoughts on this.
Daniel, just a question actually on these points that you have been raising. What do you expect? I mean, there was all this talk about Saudi normalization. I mean, we just recently had the other against many news on this front. What do you expect on Israel regional normalization? Will this process still move ahead? Maybe a bit in a delayed manner, but move ahead as planned or as projected prior to the October 7th? Or do you think that this politics and dynamics of this normalization have fundamentally changed?
I think I lost you for a second, but I guess you said fundamentally upended.
Yes.
Or something to that effect. Great. Okay. Yes. Look, I think it was built on a questionable premise. And I think that premise has really been upended. So Ebtisam, I think, spoke well about the de-escalatory trend in the region. And I think a lot of people are acknowledging that Israel is not a de-escalatory power. Israel is dangerously escalatory because it doesn't have a political horizon or a way of dealing with the Palestinians. So I think that Galit, to the extent to which, two things, or maybe even three, to the extent to which, A, people thought, look, even if you don't get a full deal with the Palestinians, you can at least kind of play the make-believe of the peace process or get the Palestinian issue on some kind of gentle track where it could find its way towards ongoing manageability. That is so much more difficult to do now. I'm not saying that it doesn't mean that a Saudi deal never happens. I think the Saudi deal was always primarily about Saudi and the US. And I think the Israeli component of the deal has become less attractive. And the Palestinian component of the deal has become even more of a fantasy. But I don't think things like the India, Middle East, Europe corridor look as real, and Ebtisam said this, as things like the Belt and Road Initiative or other things that are going on. I think they look much more difficult to implement. So that's one piece of it. The second piece of it is, I think, the US in the region.
We will come to it with this is exactly the question that I'm posing, Vale.
Last two thoughts, Gali. I think the US looks more tricky as a partner. Its idea for how it could manage the region looks more difficult. Its ally Israel has behaved in a way that is not easy for people, and the US isn't exactly doing fabulously in the Ukraine. So I think that raises a lot of questions. The last thing I want to say is, and I'll just literally throw it out there. If one's thinking about the region and thinking about the escalation, the axis of resistance forces have shown themselves rather capable in terms of balance of forces on the battlefield. And I think there is a fundamental shift there.
I think with this, it connects to Trita very nicely, because Trita, apart from Israel and Palestine, probably the angle that we have discussed the most since October 7 has been the Iran-Israel angle. So the tension between Iran, Israel, the axis of resistance. So two interrelated questions. One of them, before the October 7th, how Iran itself was positioning, what was the strategic calculus of Iran as regards to regional reset, and how has it been affected by the October 7th, and particularly what do you expect on Iran-Israeli tension? You are on mute. You are on mute.
My apologies. Well, thank you so much, Galipin. It's a great pleasure to be here with Daniel, Vali, and Ebtisam. Really looking forward to the full conversation. You raised some excellent questions. And if I start off by pointing to following what Daniel and Ebtisam was saying in regards to changes and similarities and continuations that have taken place in the region since October 7th, I would add to Daniel's list that one of the most important things that have occurred is not just that the air of Israeli military prowess and capability and competence has been shattered. I think also to a large extent its deterrence has been shattered, and its ability or its the air that it actually was self-sustainable when it comes to defense has also been shattered, mindful of the exchange of fire that has taken place between Iran and Israel and the manner in which that took place and how it ended. I'll go into that a little bit deeper. But to directly address your question, the policy that the Iranians were pursuing up until October 6th, and then it started to become shaky, and now it has changed, was one of strategic patience, which meant that, first of all, they had given up on the idea that there was any chance of the West being able to offer Iran sustainable sanctions relief. The US can offer sanctions relief. It may actually implement it for a year or two, but the ability of the United States to sustain it, the Iranians essentially given up on. And as a result, rather than focusing on nuclear negotiation and getting sanctions lifted, they were focusing on insulating themselves from sanctions, and that meant improving relations with regional states. You have the improvement of relations with the UAE, the normalization with Saudi Arabia, seeking to do much more immediate trade in the region as a way of bypassing American sanctions. As part of that, it meant that they played a long game vis-a-vis Israel. The Israelis are in a favorable position right now, but over time, the Iranian calculation was that the axis in Iran would grow stronger. In fact, if you take a look at the trajectory of things from 2006 till today, you clearly see that technology has evened the playing field between Israel and its competitors. Take a look at how Hezbollah performed vis-a-vis Israel in 2006, at a time when drones did not constitute a very significant part of the battlefield. Today, it does. And we saw very clearly how both Hamas used it on October 7th, but more recently in the exchange of fire between Iran and Israel. That strategy of strategic patience, however, was constantly coming under tension because of the manner that the Israelis were constantly pushing the envelope. We saw increasing number of attacks, taking out Iranian IRGC officials in Syria, in Lebanon, without any significant response by the Iranians. The Iranian calculation was essentially that Israel wanted to have a larger confrontation, that it was a trap, and that Iranians had to be careful not to walk into that trap. But a long game can only be successful if you also have a short game. And the argument inside of the regime, particularly after the attack on the Iranian consulate or consular section of the Iranian embassy in Damascus, was that the absence of a clear response from the Iranians to previous Israeli attacks had emboldened the Israelis, had made them feel as if they could get away with anything, and as a result, something needed to be done. Now, I personally think that there's a narrative out there that at the end of the day, 99% of the Iranian projectiles were shot down, and as Biden told the Israelis, take the win, that essentially this was a win for Israel. And I think from the Biden administration's standpoint, it makes sense to present it as such. In order for the Israelis not to respond and escalate further, they had to be given some sort of a claim to a win. But if you scratch the surface, I don't think there was much of a win there for the Israelis. I think, frankly, they would prefer to go back to the world that existed prior to April 1st when they attacked the embassy. If you take a look at what happened, the Iranians shot a large number of projectiles, above 300, but they gave the Israelis 72 hours heads up. 72 hours before the attack started, they reached out to several neighboring countries, making clear to them that they were going to attack and that they would also attack those countries, those neighboring countries, if they allowed US forces, US bases to be used in an attack against Iran. They understood perfectly well that, of course, the message would be conveyed on to the United States and to Israel. The US scrambled and managed to put together the help of France, the UK, even Italy and Jordan to make sure that they added to Israel's air defenses. Still, with 72 hours heads up, several different countries participating in shooting down the Iranian projectiles, the Iranians nevertheless managed to get 9 ballistic missiles through the Israeli air defenses, hitting 2 of Israel's military bases that the Iranians claim had been involved in the attack against the embassy or the consular section of the embassy in Damascus. What this shows is that despite this heads up, the Iranians actually did have the capacity of being able to penetrate the Israeli air defenses, which means that all of this massive investments over the course of the last 25 plus years by Israel in the Patriot, in the David Sling, in the Arrow 2, the Arrow 3, the Iron Dome, all of them massive investments, nevertheless, could not withstand an Iranian attack. Yes, a massive amount of them were shot down, but nevertheless, you had 9 of them be able to pierce through. And that was when they had the support of several countries. And that's when they did have 72 hours heads up. You take away the heads up, you take away the $1.3 billion the United States spent on during 24 hours of defending Israel. And you end up getting a much, much more different picture in which you see the vulnerability that the Israelis have. This created a new balance of terror, not one in which the Iranians, by any stretch of the imagination, are stronger, but one in which it's quite clear both sides can hurt each other in a very, very dramatic way. And as a result, the air of impunity that Israel had enjoyed, in which for the last 25 plus years, it had essentially been able to whack almost any country in the region with impunity, with no major consequences, that essentially has come to an end, or at least the cost has dramatically increased, which means that Israel's maneuverability and freedom of action is actually much more restricted today than it was on April 1st, prior to it striking the Iranian consular section of the embassy. So if I was sitting in the Israeli defense establishment, I would be quite regretful of that decision, because not only did it reveal, one European diplomat told me, Israel's deterrence has been shattered, but he also revealed that Israel ultimately cannot defend itself effectively against Iran absent massive American support. And this is a big blow, particularly mindful of Israel's desire to be able to ignore American wishes and instructions and essentially claim that degree of independence. Now, there is, of course, also the argument that, yes, but at the same time, you had the UAE, Saudi Arabia sharing intelligence with the Israelis, the Jordanians shooting down a number of these projectiles. And as a result, there was a narrative in Washington that you were starting to see the creation of an Arab-Israeli front against Iran. Again, I think that made sense from the Biden administration's perspective of trying to portray a win for the Israelis. But in reality, what you actually had there was a situation in which, on the one hand, the Jordanians had to defend their airspace, given how dependent they are on the United States. The idea that they could have shot down these Iranian drones and chose not to would have been a much more dangerous position for them to be in than the one that they took. Moreover, they made clear they would shoot down Israeli drones and missiles as well if they flew over Jordanian airspace. And interestingly enough, when the Israelis did retaliate, they flew over Syrian and Iraqi airspace and avoided Jordanian airspace in order to avoid putting the Jordanians in that position. But more importantly is this. The Saudis and the Emiratis and others made clear that US spaces on their territory could not be used against Iran. That essentially meant that all of this infrastructure that the United States had built over the course of more than 20 years, ostensibly to deter Iran, to target Iran, to encircle Iran, had actually been neutralized because these countries did not want to be caught in the crossfire. And as a result, rather than actually having this at their disposal, you could see that the Axis in Iran had managed to create a balance in which those countries chose to essentially withdraw themselves rather than taking the active side of Israel in this conflict. I think that is also a very significant change.
There are exactly several questions, actually, I would say, around this aspect. So let me pose you just 1 minute questions. So there are several questions asking about what do you expect about the future of the Saudi-Iranian normalization after the October 7th. So what's your expectation there?
Well, this seems to be going up and down on almost a daily basis. Last week, the buzz in Washington was that essentially the US-Saudi side of the deal is more or less finished. It's all about making sure that the Israelis would put their signature on it, and then we would wake up one day and it would be announced that it's a done deal. and that would then be combined with an effort to not only get a ceasefire, the Israelis would have to agree to it as part of the deal, but also to then give the Saudis credit for the ceasefire as a way for them to be able to protect themselves against the criticism that they inevitably would be facing for having normalized relations with Israel in the midst of the massacres that Israel is committing in Gaza. But given the developments of the last 24, 48 hours, with Israel going into Rafah, with Hamas accepting a variation of the ceasefire deal while Israel was rejecting it, the statement by the Saudi Foreign Ministry, and I want to emphasize the Foreign Ministry, not MBS himself yesterday, which used very harsh language, essentially argued that the Israelis are committing a genocide. It seems at this point that at least right now it is at a low, but we never know. Things can change very fast on this. I think the ultimate reality, however, is this. Even if that agreement is taken up, and we'll see if it will pass the Senate or not, it is, in my estimation, a doubling down on the very same formula that unfortunately helped bring about October 7th in the first place. Because it is essentially saying that the Palestinians are going to be thrown off the bus, hidden under the rug, and that the true peace in the region is not going to be created by actually getting the Palestinians and the Israelis to have a peace in two states, but rather through having direct flights between Ben Gurion Airport and Dubai Airport or Riyadh Airport. And that is essentially a signal to the Palestinians that 30 years of investment in a diplomatic process has not yielded anything. Yeah. And whether we like it or not, reality is that inevitably that would lead to a return to violence, as Daniel already has pointed out. This would be a doubling down of that by the Biden administration, in which they would try to outdo what Trump started with his Abraham Accords.
I will come to you later with a question on this nuclear, basically how the developments over the past 6-7 months affected the question of nuclear deterrence in the region for the countries that are aspiring to be nuclear power. That's not only, we're not only talking about Iran, but probably several Gulf Arab states as well down the road. But before that, let me go to Vali. Vali, Ibsam started her talk by saying October 7 brought back the US to the region. And so all this idea of leaving the region, downsizing the security commitments to the region was in a sense debunked. Have they been debunked? And how this process has actually shaped overall the US regional strategy?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and it's great to be with this great panelists, friends, and colleagues. I think the US's position right now is not very clear. I mean, they've been playing catch up since the day October 7th happened. I mean, if you went back to just before it, the National Security Advisor wrote for Foreign Affairs exactly what Dr. Ebtesam was saying, namely that the region is in a de-escalatory situation. It has not been this quiet for at least 10 years, all of which was actually true on October 6th. And then the world was turned upside down on Washington, and basically they didn't have a strategy. And they I think, made mistake after mistake in managing Israel, managing the conflict, and they haven't actually been able to get ahead of it. They haven't been able to control the war. They haven't been able to control the way in which Israel conducts the war. And then they actually have proven shocked and ineffective in letting the Palestinian issue, letting the humanitarian fallout in Gaza actually become something bigger than the Middle East, become an issue in the global South, and then become an issue in American domestic politics in a very dangerous way, which actually could potentially not only derail Biden's own election, but actually polarize American society along generational lines for some time to come. I'm not sold on the fact that, if there is a ceasefire in Gaza, which doesn't look like it's happening anyways, that what's unfolded in the United States is going to be very quickly put out. So if I was sitting in the Middle East, I wouldn't get a great sense of comfort that this administration knows what it's doing, or actually is capable of doing. So, the United States has had two functions in the Middle East. One is military, but one, it has been diplomatic in being able to manage the region, Arab governments, Israel, etc., through diplomacy, through varieties of things, in order to keep it going. Now, I would say for the region, Trita outlined the way Iran looks at it very well. Dr. Ibtissam said at the very beginning that the goals of at least the Gulf countries in the region is economic, is geoeconomic. Their ambitions are about economic status. Saudi Arabia is all about Vision 2030. And that, requires two things. One is quiet on the Arab street, maybe Arab street in Abu Dhabi or Dubai or even Riyadh, doesn't matter, but these countries are sitting in a larger Arab world. And the assumption about geoeconomics is that the Arab countries would be part of this, would be on board. The corridor ultimately has to run through countries that do have an Arab street. And the Arab street is really, really angry. There's no way of putting it. Now, we discount the Arab street until we cannot. Like the world was happy until Mohammed Bouazizi set himself on fire, and then all of a sudden everybody understood the Arab street. And secondly, I think that the Gulf countries understand that their geoeconomic goals require stability. You cannot have Vision 2030, or you cannot have economic progress if you have, or you cannot attract direct foreign investment if there are missiles flying over you and your airports or things can be shut down. And I think their goal right now, their interest right now is how do we get back to where we were on October 6th? It's not to serve Israel and the United States vision. If the United States cannot present a vision for the region that satisfies Riyadh and Abu Dhabi and Kuwait's ambitions, then don't expect that they are yo-yos or puppets that you could just basically bring along. I would go to a point that Daniel made, that Israel is an escalatory power. I think Israel not only has had two problems since October 7th. One is deterrence, which Trita pointed to, Daniel pointed to. Its deterrence is gone. Secondly, Israeli public's sense of security is gone. Right, the fact that they were protected under the Iron Dome and these walls around them, and somehow you could have a Stockholm and Silicon Valley in the middle of the Middle East, protected by what's going around them, is gone. And Israel's response to restoring both deterrence and security has been a sort of a massive show of force, a sort of a massive retaliation that it hoped would both make Israelis secure and restore deterrence. And it has failed on both counts. Israel doesn't have real deterrence that it had on October 6th. Doesn't matter what the media says about their ability to hit Isfahan, etc. And the minimal that Iran achieved, as was said, was actually to make Israelis more nervous and the deterrence more complicated, right? And the Israeli public is now more nervous than it was before. I've heard that more Israelis left Haifa after the Iranian missiles were shut down than was the case before, when Iran shot the missiles. And so I would say Israel is actually in a very dangerous place. It's out of its comfort zone. It's never been here. It's under an extremist government. I think the region understands this, and the Biden administration is not able to either soothe Israel's wounds, make things right for Israel, nor is able to control Israel. And I think the strategy that the United States has of, somehow it's going to normalize things between Saudi Arabia and Israel, as if normalization actually satisfies Israel's problems. That's the other side of it. Okay, maybe the Saudis get out of this a nuclear power, they get F-35s, they get American strategic deal. But what does Israel get out of this? Saudi Arabia recognizing Israel neither restores deterrence, nor does it give Israelis a sense of security, right? So I don't see why the Israelis will be jumping up and down about this deal. And in fact, the plan B is really to get the Saudis to say yes, and then to try to force the Israelis to say yes as well. And the Israelis are not going to say yes. Because they're not in a position to say yes. domestically as well as regionally, and it's going to have the same fate as the ceasefire accord. And then the idea that you would have these Arab governments defend Israel, I think is problematic, because the only thing the United States showed on April 14 to the region is that it's willing to defend Israel. It hasn't shown that it's willing to defend the Arabs. I mean, the Abu Ghraib issue is still hanging over Saudi Arabia. You're asking the Gulf countries to join in an anti-Iran alliance without actually giving them assurance that you protect them. The very reason UAE and Saudi Arabia decided to normalize with Iran after Abu Ghraib was because they came to a conclusion that the United States cannot be relied on. Now the United States is telling them, you know what, I want you to take even more risk than you were taking before by joining an anti-Iran alliance. And let me also just sort of say, put something else on the table. The fastest ballistic missile that Iran has can reach Israel in 12 minutes. It can reach Abu Dhabi or Riyadh in a matter of seconds. There is no Iron Dome that actually would protect those countries. And logically, those countries should not and would not put themselves in risk and make the Gulf a battleground when the United States neither commits to their defense nor is able to defend them, and that actually their national strategies are now tied to a Gulf that is cold, right? Why would these countries follow a risky strategy of defending Israel when it actually puts them at risk? You're on mute.
I think you raise a crucial dilemma of the Gulf Arab states. Yes, US might be back after the October 7th, but the US back is for US back for Israel, not for the Arab states, not for the Gulf. And I think that's probably the dilemma of the Arab Gulf states, and probably that's the reason that even if the US is back, we are unlikely to see any change in the patterns of these regional states forming closer relation with other global powers, be it China, Russia, etc. The question for you, for years we discussed about making, in a sense, the Middle East less nuclear. But now it seems the US might making the Middle East more nuclear. The proposed or the talk about an Saudi-US security pact, particularly if it has a nuclear dimension. So the question to you actually, will it have a nuclear dimension? Like what kind of a security pact do you expect between Saudi Arabia and the United States? And will it have a nuclear dimension? And if it does, what does it mean for the region-wide race, nuclear race in the Middle East?
So I think there is the dynamic is stronger because it used to be only about Iran. It's also now about Israel. I think all the region, as Daniel said, is looking at an Israel that is extremist, that is nuclear, and that it's is also very aggressive. And ultimately, right now, the region is sort of caught between the rivalry of one nuclear and one potential nuclear power. And I think that the Saudis have made it very clear that they want a nuclear technology from the United States, a nuclear program that is full fuel cycle. They don't just want, to receive the fuel, run electricity grid, and then hand over the fuel. They want,
and not only for the civilian purposes.
Well, the civilian purpose is always the entry. The Shah wanted civilian purposes in the 70s. Iran wanted Iran still says it wants it for civilian purposes. Yes, it may be for civilian purposes, but they want to master the entire fuel cycle. It means that they want everything that Iran has, which is enrichment capability, cascades of centrifuges, ability to experiment, and they keep the fuel in the country, right? So that potentially means the Iran model. That's what Saudis are asking. And if the US doesn't give it to them, they probably will go to China and get it. So I think that genie is out of the box. And then I think Iran itself, now looking at the United States and Israel, and looking particularly at Israel, don't forget that, before Israel, before Iran retaliated, there was a taunting tweet put online, I think largely from an Israeli intelligence source with a picture of Tehran at night, and then underneath it said before. The implication being the after is Gaza, right? So if you're dealing with that, missiles and etc. is not going to be enough. I think Iran now, after this exchange, will look at nuclear capability as the ultimate deterrence against Israel. And then the Gulf countries, again, have to make a calculation based on that. And not just Iran, but Iran-Israeli rivalry and what it means to them. In other words, do they need nuclear power in order to keep the Gulf secure so they can pursue their geoeconomic interests?
And maybe a very small question, a brief one. How do you expect all these trends affecting China and Russia's place in the region?
I think it affects them positively. Yes, they have economic vulnerabilities, but those countries are more in a position to influence Tehran in order not to target Gulf countries. And the Gulf countries will see those countries as more relevant to them. Look, Dr. Ibtisam is right. The Houthis are now making a mess of Red Sea, but they're not attacking UAE and Saudi Arabia at the moment, right? And that's not because of the United States. It's not U.S. bombing of the Houthis that is deterring them from attacking Saudi Arabia and UAE. So this normalization between Iran, UAE, and Saudi Arabia is important, and also the influence that China and Russia will have because of their interest in UAE and Saudi Arabia to tell Tehran that you need to lean on the Houthis. So there is a whole game happening out there that is bringing certain degree of stability to some conflicts in the region that doesn't include the United States.
Ibtisam, that is a very nice transition to you. Does the Gulf trust in the U.S. security commitment to the region has increased or decreased since the October 7th? And secondly, how do you look from the Gulf to the tension between Iran and Israel? Is this increasing insecurity in the Gulf? Because as Vali said, Iran's missile can reach the Gulf capitals within a matter of seconds. And finally, also, there's a question here. There seems to be, to add my own comment, there seems to be the global and societal impact of the Gaza war far supersedes its impact on the regional governmental level relation, the regional government's relation with the US. So what has been the impact of the Gaza war on the regional government's relation with the US, particularly for the Gulf?
It's the I would say first, no matter still, US is an important ally for the Gulf, right? Whether we like it, we don't like it. But this is not because this deterioration in that relation or mistrust from the Gulfists towards, it's not only related to Gaza war. It goes back when IRGC attacked Saudi brig, the Aramco's oil field, when it attacked UAE tankers, and when Houthi attacked the UAE. And before that also in Yemen war, okay? When about the Arab alliance about to reach Hodeidah, and the British and US stopped them because of the humanitarian issue, and it empowered Houthi more and more. And if you also add to that, the US, the misery situation when they left Afghanistan, and that situation also, I would say, make the Gulfi or look to US an credible ally. Okay, so all of that, if you put them together, that's why, and they thinking why we should follow US, why should US enemies should be our enemy? We should choose our national interest. It's our priority. So that's why lately.
So that effectively means
UAE and
Iran is not
Saudi-
our enemy. Is
No, no.
like just
UAE and Saudi refused to join the Prosperity Alliance in Red Sea, and UAE refused to let US using its military base because, you know, the Iranian retaliation is against the Gulf. They don't attack US, right? So whatever US do or we do, Iranian retaliation against us. And there is a reality, a geographic reality. Iran is there. It's our neighbor. Whether we like it, we don't like it, okay, it's a difficult neighbor, we have to deal with that. So that's why they choose normalization with Iran rather than fighting the American war against Iran. They found it's not, I mean, pushing them in that conflict, the consequences is against their stability, against their prosperity. So that's why they choose their own path to deal with Iran rather than the American path. And now that also, the other question, what is it? The regional, what is the second question?
The regional states relation with the US. Have they been severely or negatively affected by what has happened since October 7th, or not really?
The double standards. Okay. Now, look, how you view, with all respect to the Ukrainian war and what's happening, but I mean, when you look to the both Gaza war and Ukraine war, there is double standards. As if those people in Gaza, those civilians has been killed, they are, as one from the Israeli government look at them as enemies, and the others, why not care for the humanity in every way? And that's also the weak situation of US taking it regarding this conflict. The glory image of the superpower US can or have that leverage on its allies in the region, it doesn't exist. So that's why the credibility of US in the region, it's not anymore like before.
One final question on Abraham Accord. I mean, you said that it has been disrupted, but no signatories of the accord has, in a sense, gave up on it. Do you expect going forward, particularly if we see also an attack on Rafah city, will this make, you know, the signatories of the Abraham Accord, the Arab states, to reconsider their place in this accord and even withdraw from it?
Look, I mean, the signatories did not pull out from that agreement. I was even warning before that no more members joining the club. Since that new government came, okay, Netanyahu's government, nobody, because of the Arab street pressure, because of that, because of the violence against the Palestinian as well. But if you look ahead, if the region, if this war finished, if we are going to the path of peace, in fact, I don't believe the two-state solution. None of the Israeli government, far right, far left, or centric, will agree to have two-state solution, right? So at least giving the Palestinian their rights for living as anyone in Israel. This is the I would say not this is the maximum which we can look for. So if this has happened, if this is the war, might be a new government, not the same government, of course, okay, willing to give the Palestinian their rights, willing. Now, all this normalization, by the way, yes, the relation is there, but no exchange in trade, in economic, there is nothing. This has been stopped between the governments.
Thank you. Trita, thank you. Trita, I mean, there is like multiple level, I would say, tension surrounding Iran, Israel, but also kind of the discontent or tension between Iran and the West, particularly the United States. So what do you expect on this front? And also bearing in mind, if down the road we have Trump in office, will this make the prospect of, which I see the kind of the catastrophic scenario of the regional order, will this make the prospect of an Israeli-Iranian war more likely, less likely? How would this affect this calculation?
Excellent questions.
And also the nuclear deterrence, like if you also share your
all right,
view.
I'll try to address all of them. If I could say one thing first about this idea that the U.S. is back in the region. I think certainly temporarily, it's clear that the attention of the United States has been dragged dramatically into the region at the expense of both Ukraine and China. To conclude, however, that this is a new trend, that essentially the US is not just back in the region, but back in the region to stay, I think is taking the conclusion too far. In fact, I would say that this president, Biden, is probably the last Democratic president that is going to show this degree of support for Israel. When you see the demographic changes taking place in the region, in the United States right now, I think the trend quite clearly points to the direction in which the Israeli-American relationship is going to transform. It's not, of course, going to continue to be a strong partnership, etc.
And this make it more partisan, this question in U.S. politics, because for long, the U.S.-Israel relation was seen as bipartisan. So the trend is more partisan U.S.-Israel relationship.
Well, it's interesting you raise that. I think is a key motivation behind Biden's strategy of standing so firmly behind Israel, regardless of what Israel is doing, is actually to try to reverse a trend that had been put in place for the last 20 years, and Netanyahu himself has been actively leading, which is to actually try to make Israel a partisan issue in the United States, an issue that has primarily Republican support. And this is to a large extent driven by his calculation that Israel cannot count on the Jewish American community in the long run because they're progressive and ultimately are not going to accept the type of violations that Israel is committing on a daily basis, whereas evangelical Christians can be a much more pliant partner for Israel. Even that calculation, I don't think, is working out the way he thought, because the trends amongst younger American evangelicals is actually tracking more closely with younger Americans in general, in which the perspective on Israel is turning increasingly negative. Anyways, I just wanted to point out that, the idea that the U.S. is back, yes, temporarily, yes. If there is an agreement in which the United States signs a war obligation, a security pact with Saudi Arabia, then certainly I think that would be an indication that the U.S. is doubling down on its military presence in the region. But again, it remains to be seen if that actually is going to happen or not. As to the question of the nuclear deterrence, I think Vali made an excellent point that Iran may very well at this point look at the price that it's paying for its nuclear program. It's not going to be able to get sanctions relief, seeing that this latest episode probably is going to lead to the Israelis investing heavily in order to be able to overcome what Iran has managed to put in place. And as a result, the tilt may end up being in favor of moving towards a weapon rather than just a nuclear program. I think that is a very fair argument. And certainly, I would add to that the failure of the Security Council to condemn the Israeli attack on the Iranian embassy should not be neglected in this equation. That was a clear violation. The vast majority of the countries wanted a condemnation, but France, the UK, and the United States stood in the way of that, and that has certainly been noted in Iran as a sign of it not being able to rely on these institutions for its protection, even in the case of a very clear aggression by a third party. But I would also say that you also saw that Iran's deterrence against Israel actually had been quite effective. The Iranian nuclear program was never motivated by Israel having a nuclear program. Iran's deterrence against Israel has been built on the back of these various organizations throughout the region, proxies, militias, whatever you want to call them, with Hezbollah being the foremost of those, rather than thinking that the nuclear program is a deterrence against Israel. I think the nuclear program had many motivations, but the security one has largely, frankly, been a bargaining chip. But that bargaining chip is now lost because the West, from the Iranian perspective, is not in a position to bargain. It is not willing or capable to give up its sanctions in a prolonged and sustained manner. And that goes to the first question you asked, which now slips my mind. What was the first thing you asked me?
Your voice is gone.
Sorry?
I said like the Iran-Western tension. So what do you expect?
The Iran-Western tension. I think at this point we are
if you can do 1 minute.
Close. Yes, very close to some form of a point of no return, in the sense that for the last 25 years there's been a struggle in Iran as to whether to orient itself towards the West or orient itself towards the East. And the JCPOA occurred at a time in which the world was still somewhat unipolar. At a minimum, the United States still was the gatekeeper of who is in the international community and who is a pariah. The United States has lost that gatekeeping capacity. It is no longer the US that decides whether a state is a pariah or not. In that sense, the world is already clearly multipolar, which then means that the attraction that the Iranians had, one of the key cards the US had in its negotiations with the Iranians in the past was precisely that, letting them into the community of nations, as Obama put it. That is no longer a pathway that the Iranians have to take. So I think you are going to see an orientation of Iran towards the East, but perhaps not entirely. The question is, in the next few years, can something still be done to create some degree of balance? Or will the West completely lose Iran for the next few decades?
I think there is the tendency in also op-eds or analysis on the Middle East to argue that the impact of this war on the regional politics has not been as far-reaching as many think. But the deeper that you dig into it, it seems that actually the impact has been very significant. I mean, what you are just saying, that the Iran's geopolitical orientation, we are at the point of no return in terms of East-West geopolitical orientation, or the question of the Gaza war adding further fuel to the potential regional nuclear race. All these elements tells me actually, irrespective of what government does, the war, this war is shaping the region in fundamental ways, the regional geopolitics in many fundamental ways. Daniel, there is several questions revolving around the Qatar's mediation efforts, and there has been also quite many campaign against Qatar in the US by Israel. So one question is, if Qatar stops this mediation, who can step in for this role, and how would you assess the track record of this mediation? And if you can confine it to 2 minutes, I know that it's not easy, I would be quite happy.
My goal in life normally is to make you happy, Galip. So why deviate from that now?
Perfect.
Look, I think Qatar has tried to play that mediating role. It does so alongside Egypt. I think America's less of a mediator in that respect. Egypt and Qatar aren't necessarily working for the elimination of either Israel or the Hamas side, whereas the US is working for the elimination of one of those sides. I think this game of Israel trying to make Qatar pay a price for its mediation is just part of the broader play of undermining the talks. And I know that for the Qataris and for the team, this is a difficult thing to go through, but I almost wouldn't make too much of it. Can I offer a closing thought from my side, Galip? If I'm
sure, please do.
I'm just reflecting on listening to our conversation for an hour and just the depth of this crisis for Israel. And I think it's come out in everyone's statements. And the Israelis may be telling themselves stories about how magnificently They pushed back the Iranian combined drone missile strike, but the system itself knows the truth. And as an Israelis that night were like, what the hell is going on? They're saying basically the drones, the missiles are coming. Good luck. We may or may not see you in the morning. And that's because the Israelis knew what was happening. They knew what was, what the Iranians were trying to achieve, and that this wasn't attempting mass devastation and destruction. But Israeli civilians were just left totally discombobulated. This whole narrative of Israel will defend itself by itself, which has been a key Netanyahu mantra, shown to be total fantasy, the undercutting of the deterrence, the economic vulnerabilities. Now, as I reflect on that, Israeli Jews will need a landing place. And, having worked so hard with the Palestinians and in key respects regionally to burn all the safe off-ramps, it's going to be really hard to construct that landing space. And we don't have an Israeli opposition today that, even if they were to come to power, is really offering an alternative. You're not seeing it yet. Maybe ultimately the extent of this shock to the system produces something different. But in the Jewish world, Zionism is under the microscope. Has this been a good project? Has actual existing Zionism done what it says on the tin, which is safety and security for Jews and Israeli Jews? Two states seems to have been, fundamentally undermined. And so all I'd say is that from the outside, the fact that the US is still coming at this with such limited thinking, what Valley said about America's approach prior to October 7th and ever since, the inability or rather the attempt to impose again all these failed things at a time when, it's only words, but the organization of the Islamic Conference just had its meeting in Banjul in Gambia and announced, made its statement. The words in that statement, it's only words, but still, colonialism, apartheid, and genocide. When 25 states have made submissions to the ICJ, which refer to apartheid, to think that you can squeeze this back into the tin of the compromised Palestinian Authority and of some kind of bullshit peace process, it's a real insult to intelligence, and it really is not going to help Israel also find that landing space. And an Israel that sees no landing space is a more dangerous place. So, this requires actual thinking, not spokesperson bullshit.
Vali, I know we're 4 minutes beyond our time, but one final question on there has been all this expectation that we will see some form of international conference down the road that the US probably will leading to deal with the Palestinian issue. So A, do you expect any such conference to take place? And B, if it does, will this have any real substance or will it be just a show where the Palestinian question once again be actually dumped and then the regional normalization will be giving new legitimacy by such a conference?
I don't expect such a conference. I think these are talking points. I mean, Israel is starting another phase of the war, which could be even more gruesome. Nobody knows what's going to happen to the population in Gaza, in Rafah. What are they going to be talking about? And so I wouldn't hold my breath. And I think the length of that war, the Rafah operation, will bring us close to the elections, which means that nothing will happen then. And then, it goes to the next administration. So, I don't, and also the US doesn't really have an agenda even for that conference, at least as we know. Or is that conference going to convene to confirm the establishment of a Palestinian state, or to sort of restart another 2 decades of talking about a Palestinian state? So, no, I mean, I'm not holding my breath right now.
Yes. And if you, if let's assume that Trump is there, would there be any fundamental change between the Trump and Biden administration policy on the subject?
there hasn't been fundamental difference between Biden and Trump on a host of things when he came in, including Iran. And my read of Trump is a few fundamental things are important. The guy doesn't want war, even less so than Biden. Was not willing to defend Saudi Arabia or attack Iran when it looked like it, and potentially he's going to look at that picture and come to the same sort of conclusions. How do I get out of this? I don't think Trump is going to arrive and see how I can do what George Bush did. In other words, conduct clinical surgery on the region to make it all peaceful and democratic forever. So I don't see the worst case scenarios coming forward with Trump. I mean, potentially, I think the country that probably has to worry most about Trump is Israel, not Iran or the Arab countries.
So that's an interesting conclusion. And thank you very much for all the speakers, audience, for the great conversation, also excellent questions. And thank you very much to the comms team of the Middle East Council on Global Affairs for organizing it. And this conversation was recorded, so it was live streamed. So the recording will be made available in the coming days. So once again, thank you very much, and hope to see you in next webinars or panels soon. See you.
Thank you so much.